I hope that everybody had a good time in lunch. And before we begin the afternoon session, I want to quickly announce the winner of the social media challenge. The winner is going to get 4 tickets to the Museum of Natural History. And the winner is brain science. That's pretty good. Folks, now for next year, you know what the baseline is, right? This is what we're looking for. All right, and now I'm pleased to welcome back Dr. Jarvis for his afternoon talk, Learning to Fly, Becoming a Scientist in a Diverse Environment. So thank you, Eric, for taking us through your journey again.
Well, welcome back, everybody, and I see there are more coming in, so I hope you enjoyed your lunch and the morning presentation. And I just want to say that the questions that I received made me feel good in 2 ways. One is that they were so great, I was amazed how much you're thinking about these problems that we're studying. But I was also surprised about how well I was able to communicate them to you. So this is good, and also how well your teachers are teaching you. So I want to give everybody a round of applause for your participation. Thank you. So for this afternoon session, I'm going to talk about some things I've been asked to talk about sometimes that is my own life personal experience, and how I think that is useful, not just to tell you about it, but it's useful for your own lives. And I often get asked the question, how do I do what I'm doing? How did I get where I'm going? And I'm always surprised that I'm even asked, because I'm wondering, what's the big deal? All right? And so when I was asked to talk about this topic today, I put together a presentation that kind of explains at least my thinking process. And I'm thinking about not just me, but I'm thinking about you. All right? What can I say that will impact and help your own lives and the decisions you're making about what do you want to do for the rest of your life, whether you're a student or a teacher. What do you, where you want to go? Do you like science? Do you like something else? How do you fit as a male, woman, or person of different diverse backgrounds into this? So we titled this "Learning to Fly," pun there because of birds. But becoming a scientist in a diverse environment. So, and I want to start that off actually summarizing a little bit of the science and tell you how I was influenced by my cultural upbringing. So I showed you this slide earlier of all these different bird species, some vocal learners, non-learners, others we don't know, and so forth, and what we did with that. This is the most number of species of people that had analyzed their genomes or vocal learning genetics ever at that time in 2014 when we were publishing on these species. And to do this project, to get the genetic code of all these different species representing the bird family tree, not one lab could do it. I had to work with many other people. I did submit grants to our federal funding agencies like National Institute of Health or National Science Foundation, and they all said no. I did go to the deans and so forth and the presidents of the school I was in and convince them if we had all these genomes done of all these species, we would learn great things about language and everything else. I was told no and so forth. And so trying to figure out how we're going to do this. And so we formed this consortium called the Avian Phylogenomics Project, where scientists from around the world got together and pooled whatever little bit of money they had together, along with a collaboration with a company in China called Beijing Genome Institute. We were able to manage to sequence the genomes of all these species in a collective manner, in a collaboration of over 200 people, okay, from 20 countries. And That ended up producing a set of 50 papers we published in 2014 and 2016. 28 of those papers on a single day in the scientific literature, all right? And 8 of them in a special issue of Science magazine. It's one of the top journals in science. And this is a bird here that the editor selected for the cover of the magazine because it's a bird that was hard to place in the family tree. It was sort of like a mutt bird. It had kind of like traits of a whole bunch of different birds, and even had some dinosaur-like traits in its claws. And it was really hard to place in the tree of birds to see who it's related to. And with the whole genome done, we were able to, for the first time in scientific history, place who it's related to. But we had papers focused on neurogenetics, on evolution of certain specialized traits, methodology, and computer science, and so forth. And so this really took a team-wide effort of many people from around the world. And it led to us being able to help identify these convergent brain regions between the songbirds and humans. And with that excitement discovery, it also then led others to come to me and say, Eric, with the success of bringing people together from around the world for just bird genomes, can you do this for all animal genomes? And I reluctantly said yes. So now I'm the chair of what's called the Vertebrate Genomes Project that I told you about earlier to do this. And this is involving even more people. And this is expanded out to something else called the Earth Biogenomes Project, or to sequence the genomes of all living, what's called eukaryotic species. Has anybody heard that term in here, eukaryotes? Okay, what's the definition? Multi-cell, well, you can have single-cell eukaryotes. Huh? Someone speak up, I can't hear so well. That's right, a membrane, that's right, a nuclear membrane. So, mitochondria, that's right, thank you. Okay. So there are 1.5 million of them, eukaryotic species, from single cell to multicellular organisms. And so someone once told me that, Eric, they think you're one of the few people that can do this. And I wondered how, like, what is it that I'm doing that others are not doing? And I discovered one day, because they said I can convince people to come together, to work together, to love one another, and so forth. And I realized one day it's my culture, upbringing. Just like I told you about the folks who developed the term neocortex and what they were thinking about the different ethnicities and so forth. Well, I grew up in a family that was arguing who they should support, Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, all right? And there was this battle in families, particularly of color, because they had two different approaches. One approach of the Martin Luther King family approach was bring everybody together, bring world peace, work together, whereas the Malcolm X approach back in the 1960s was to sort of say it's okay to have different separate ethnic communities, just that the black community has to have equal access and education and so forth as the white community, as the Asian community, and so forth. And so Malcolm X lived by the philosophy of by any means necessary as well, which was considered a more radical or in some cases violent. And so what I did is taken the teachings that I heard my grandparents, my parents talk about, and the arguments they went through and who we should be supporting, to actually adopt it into my science, where I take on any kind of project by any means necessary, except for killing people, but bring all techniques and all technologies and all kinds of people together for a unified, one world kind of view. And it's with that kind of upbringing that I have been running these projects. It's my Martin Luther King and Malcolm X training. And so I've been trying to evaluate that in my own self and others, and it doesn't have to be a person of color to actually have that kind of training. So we're going to come back to that concept and take a step back with this, not only the successes of these large-scale international projects, but with the successes of some individual projects from my own lab with my students and others. Reporters come to me sometimes not only asking about the science, but they ask about how did you do this? And I say, do what? And so some of the things here I'll just say is, you know, I went to the High School of Performing Arts as a dancer here in New York, as you heard earlier. And I was on my way to becoming a professional dancer and decided to switch to becoming a scientist, which I'll tell you about in a minute. I went a few blocks away from here as an undergraduate student. Soon, some of you I know are applying to schools. Hunter College is a great one, as many others are. And I got into underrepresented minority support programs like MBRS and MARC, Minority Biomedical Research Programs. I stayed in the same lab. There, I got into a laboratory to do research on bacterial genetics, on genes that synthesize proteins. They're called, has anybody heard of these? Genes that synthesize proteins. They start with an R. Ribosomal proteins, good, good. We really have a good audience here. So I studied ribosomal proteins as an undergraduate student and really spent a lot of effort and time in the lab and published 7 papers, several as first author from that lab. Not all at this time I was there, some came after I had left, and really found the passion for science. I applied to many different graduate schools. I got accepted into Rockefeller University here as a student, so thank you for the university for doing that for me. And I stayed on after I got my Ph.D. You heard from Jeannie that there's something called the postdoc, where you work as a scientist in a lab. I did that for 3 years. And these two combined were 9 years. With my mentor, Fernando Nottebohm, we published 9 papers as a result of that work on songbirds and some other things. And then I left New York City, got an offer as assistant professor at Duke University to build my own lab and have my own students and postdocs. And over a course of 6 years, my first 6 years there, we published 17 papers collectively with students and so forth. And then I eventually became tenured. And in a 10-year period, I was tenured as what they call associate professor. We had published 80 papers, so you can see the numbers going up. And then full professor back in January 2016. And after becoming full professor, I left. And came back to my alma mater here, which a place that I love dearly. And so, so some of the students may not know here, but you know, these are difficult universities to get in either as students or faculty. The bar is raised pretty high, and also at this kind of publication rate, looking back on my trajectory here, my journey, it is productive. Truthfully, my bar was set higher than what others were setting for me. So when reporters and others ask, how did you do it? I'm like, how did I do what? I haven't even achieved what I'm trying to achieve yet. I still got more to go. And a lot of times they're asking not only how did you do it as an individual human being, but they're asking how did you, a person with your color skin, born in Harlem, New York City, African-American male, do what you did, right? Because this is not so common. I'm like, okay, I got to figure this out, why they're asking me this. And so, even then, so the same thing is some awards that I've gotten, National Science Foundation Alan T. Wardeman Award. It's given to one person per year who made some significant discoveries below the age of 35 at the time. And it's the top award given to a young professor. And I got it in 2002. NIH Director's Pioneer Award, a similar type of award given to more people to do some crazy experiments like I told you about. Howard Hughes Medical Institute, this is all, this is a private foundation, a very coveted thing to be funded by, institution to be funded by, that funds my research to do the kind of things that I like to do and be creative. And then some awards for diversity in science, like MERS Mark Scholars Award, Ernest Everett Just Award for the American Society for Cell Biology. So like the career trajectory of publications in science, I get the same question here. And further, that for these two awards here, I was the first person of color to get the award. And for this one, I was the second. And so then I'm wondering, well, what happened to you? What's going on? Can you tell us something? And so after being asked that question so many times, I decided to write an article about it. And I titled it, Surviving as an Underrepresented Minority Scientist in a Majority Environment. And what I'm going to tell you today is some of those lessons that I feel is important for everybody to know about. Not just the persons who are, let's say, the the ones who are disadvantaged, but also ones who have advantages or various advantages and disadvantages. And one of the first things that I have to say, it's not so much about diversity, ethnicity, but diversity of careers. Whereas, they were also asking, well, how did you become what was that transition? And a student just asked me a minute ago as well. What made you transition from becoming a dancer to a scientist? Here is a picture that the Smithsonian Magazine incorporated from my photo albums in an article that they wrote about this. And this is when I was in the Westchester Ballet Company and doing the Nutcracker, and they gave me the role of the Arabian guy. So that's the role that I could fit, I imagine. And so, but the transition to me was that when I became a scientist, right, is that being an artist, being trained to become a dancer, was actually training me to become a scientist, because both require a lot of discipline, both require creativity, both require trying something over and over and over again, or trying it different ways until you finally get it right, until you finally get the choreography right, or land a good audition. And both are not quite 9-to-5 jobs. And so, so with all of that, I had discovered over time, by the time I became an assistant professor, that being trained to become a dancer trained me to become a scientist. And so I encourage everybody in this audience who wants to become a scientist that tap into the artistic side of you, because science is an art, all right? So learn how to do well in science, it's an art, all right? Whether that be dance, playing music, or drawing. So, so I then became an assistant professor, or here I say, the transition between dance and science was natural, of both required discipline, creativity, hard work, and often acceptance of failure before something works, all right? So second big lesson for me was, that gets more into issues of diversity and ethnicity, are role models. When I look back on my history, I realized I had bad role models. I had family members who were into drugs, who were getting arrested, unfortunately getting killed in some cases. And I had some good role models, some nuggets in my family. And one of them was my own grandfather, was a guy who grew up here in New York City, although his parents came from North Carolina. They left during the Great Recession or Depression back in the 1930s to come to New York City. And he emulated honesty, excellence, and so forth. My father, on the other hand, was a guy who decided to drop out of school, get hooked on drugs. Even, actually, he was actually trying to, I can say this about him now because he's passed, but he was going to college for a chemistry degree, and in the 1960s dropped out of college during what we call the Cultural Revolution, got involved in synthesizing drugs, joined the Black Panther movement, and so forth, and eventually became homeless. And so, so I tried not to follow in those footsteps. But my grandfather, I did, where he became eventually the district director of the New York City Post Office. There are some other role models for me, too, as well. The role model doesn't have to be your own ethnicity or own gender. When I got to Hunter College and started doing research in the laboratory, the head of the lab, Rivka Rudner, was a Jewish woman born in Israel and came here to the US to get a degree, and she ran a lab. And she likes to call me her Jewish mom, okay? She looked after me, she made sure that I was doing well in the lab, and really try to also emulate excellence now in science, but also how to be a good citizen in science. And from her, she was a mentor and a role model for me, even though not my gender, not my ethnicity. A third lesson here that I've learned is opportunities. Many people, particularly from underrepresented backgrounds of women, don't realize that there are opportunities that are there for them that don't exist, and many people don't realize they have disadvantages that they don't realize they do have. And how I learned that I had a disadvantage that I didn't realize I had is when I left here at Rockefeller and applied to different schools for an assistant professorship position. and got to Duke for my interviews and got offered and was getting offers from other places, they said, oh, there's one thing we didn't tell you about. That is, if you come to Duke and you're a professor here for 5 years or more, and if you have children, and I did have 2 children, and I still do, yeah, okay, at that time, right? And if you have children, then we will pay for your children's, up to 2 children's college tuition for wherever they go in the world at 75% of Duke's level. If they make it into Duke, 100% tuition, right? And I go, what? Say that again? It's like, and they said it again, and I really had to say, could you show it to me in writing, right? Such a program exists? This just blew my mind. And what further blew my mind about it is that Duke University did not allow faculty of my skin color to become faculty, or even students of my color, before 1968. So my parents, my grandparents could not have given me such an award for being a faculty member at Duke, because they were not allowed to be faculty there, only white Americans or Caucasians generally. And so, so I discovered, oh my goodness, here's affirmative action for white Americans that's been around for decades, right? That I didn't have an advantage of. So I realized that the affirmative action programs I was benefiting from were actually advantages, yes, due to me being a person of color, that offset disadvantages due to me being a person of color. And that, so then I realized these are opportunities also that people before my time had made happen, that made the rules change in 1968, that allowed people of color to become professors and students. So what I call my equation of success is you do have to have hard work, some talent in what you're doing, and opportunity, all right? And when one of these is missing, you don't have these full equations of success. And I can tell you here, all the students that have teachers that brought you here, they're bringing you to an opportunity, all right? And here is an opportunity where you're hearing from somebody who's telling you all of these words, hopefully of wisdom, that I've learned over the years, to take for yourself, and regardless of what background, what gender you are, to pay attention to this and take advantage of the opportunities that your teachers are bringing towards you, right? So opportunities for me have been these affirmative action programs that I said offset disadvantages and so on. So I'm going to come back to now diversity, my Martin Luther King upbringing. I discovered that when I became a student doing research in the laboratory and eventually having my own laboratory, I was starting to bring in lots of different techniques to answer different questions, and more so than some other of my colleagues at the time. And I was trying to figure out why is that? And I wasn't afraid to bring in behavior anatomy. We talked about that today on the brain of vocal learning species. I talked about some computational biology, evolution, genomics, even recording electrodes, putting electrodes in the brain and recording the action potentials. I didn't talk about that today, but we've done all of this type of work. And I discovered that my readiness to try to bring all these approaches to the lab is because of my Martin Luther King upbringing, partly, all right? It's also that I think that we're also taught in a, let's say, I'm going to call it a more westernized view of science, is be the individual, prove yourself, prove that you can do this alone, independent of help from others. And I said, well, why do I need to do that? All right? Why do I need to always, show that Erich Jarvis did this separate from somebody else, beating my chest in competition and so forth? I said, no. If I'm not an expert in recording neural activity in the brain or computer science, I'm going to go out there and convince somebody else, convince you in the audience, hey, this is a great project. You're an expert in computer programming, or you're an expert in learning how to fly or something like this. Please come join my effort and work with me and bring your expertise to my effort. This is not a common way in which science was done, actually, when I was a student. And that's one way in which I bring all these approaches together. And what I've also discovered when I was at Duke, and here as well, I had some people come to my lab and walk by and says, Eric, your lab is different. And I go, what do you mean different, right? Well, it has more color to it, right? It's more diverse and so forth. And what I discovered, all of my professors, my advisors, have been Caucasian people, whether men or women. In my lab, I've had people come to me, and it's not that I'm purposely seeking them out, of all different ethnicities from around the world. And what I find is that they tend to be more comfortable sometimes with me because of my background and so forth. I wish that wasn't the case, that they would be comfortable anywhere. But what I find by having a diversity of opinions and views and cultures in the lab, the science is more rich. People come to you with different cultural upbringings, and that influences the ideas that you then generate and the experiments that you do. This has now been shown experimentally. Actually, there's now a whole field of looking at the impact of diversity in science and other areas. Scientists actually go out and study the impact. And a good analogy is this, to a company or institution's success, or even the success of a classroom. And that is, imagine if you are a cell phone company, all right? And you're trying to sell your cell phones, your iPhones or whatever they are, around the world to people that look different from you, various different backgrounds. If you are all male, or all Caucasian, or even all African, or of any particular African country running the company, it's going to be harder for you to market your product and can communicate with the rest of the world than with a company that has people from diverse backgrounds. So companies with people of diverse backgrounds tend to be more successful than ones who are mono-ethnic or mono-gender. And the same thing, I believe, goes for science. And it's like bringing physicists together who started dabbling in biology, Watson and Crick, and they discovered DNA. And that's a good example of bringing techniques together. So what about my own diversity? As you heard me say, and as you heard Gina say, African American, right? But you can look at me and you can tell, well, I'm not quite, at least not straight out of the heart of Africa, right, in my ancestry. And that would be okay if that were true. But in my own family, through oral history, I've been told, actually, there have been some oral history passed on of these 3 different ethnic groups in Africa, but also Native American here in the United States and several European groups. And in my family, there are people of all shades and backgrounds, and I grew up arguing, and they are arguing with me, like, oh, you're not proud of your blackness, or you're not proud of your whiteness, or you're trying to be white, or you're not proud of your Native American ancestry. And even my grandmother saying we had some Chinese, I said, where'd that come from, right? And so this got me involved in understanding not only origins of vocal learning, but origins of my own ancestry, origins of people. And so I sequenced my own mitochondrial DNA when I was a graduate student here. and it matched an African-American woman in the United States who was in the database, so that didn't help much in terms of where to figure out from Africa. But later on, as I became more of an adult and a professor, 23andMe and Ancestry.com started doing these things, and using what we call SNPs, little pieces of changes in the DNA across a person's genome, you can kind of figure out what population they came from. And so here they color-coded the 23 chromosomes and the sex chromosome, the X chromosome here, in different colors according to different ethnic groups here. And so here, this is an example person from Nigeria. Both chromosomes from mother and father of each of the 23 chromosomes are mostly purple, with a little bit of European ancestry back there somewhere on the X chromosome. Here is an example European. I'm not giving people's names here, but they let me do this. All right, example European, where colored in blue, different European ancestries, British, French, German, Southern European, and so forth. So here is a person for many generations who has ancestry that's been limited to Europe, okay? Here is a person of close to a first-generation mixture, where one chromosome is European, one is African, one European, one African. And so this is what a half-and-half person would look like in terms of their genome. And here is myself, okay? All right? And you can see there's a lot of mixture going on here, a lot of recombination. Do people know how that recombination occurs about? What happens in the egg and the sperm cells? Yes.
Crossover during mitosis.
That's right. Crossover during meiosis, actually. That's right. And so, so the mother and father chromosomes of your body are crossing over in different egg and sperm cells that gives rise to the next generation. And each generation, you get more and more crossing from the previous one, right? And so what this indicates is about 7 generations of a lot of crossing, of a lot of mixture. We call it admixture. And actually, even before 23andMe gave the result, when I was a faculty member, I convinced another faculty member at Duke to sequence my whole genome, not just the mitochondrial genes, right? And then I had another colleague at Stanford analyze my genome, Carlos Bustamante. One of his postdocs looked at it and came back one day in an email saying, oh, you're 79% European, right? And I said, what? That's impossible, right? Then I started sending pictures of my family, of all the darkest people in my family, right? To show that this is not the case. And he says, oh, we used the wrong wrong database. We need to use the admixture database. And I came back with a similar percentage here, which is roughly 49% European, 49% African, all right? And then 1% Native American, or point something percent. And so, so who am I supposed to be representing? That's what I did. I woke up one day when I was white. I was thinking, who am I supposed to be representing, right? And so, when I was here at Rockefeller, right before I came to Rockefeller, met somebody at Hunter College who also came here as a postdoc, became my wife, and we had a daughter, and my wife is Puerto Rican. And look, this is my daughter's genome. It's like she says, Daddy, what can I say I am, right? And so, and now here we have in orange, a lot of Native American admixture from Tainos in Puerto Rico, all right? And even in the Ancestry and the 23andMe database, they have barely no North American Indian samples in their database. So if you are North American, part North American Indian, it's not going to show up. But Taino they have. And so this is when she graduated with her own master's in environmental policy. And so, so we can see now we're becoming a different kind of race. And it turns out, if you listen to the folks who are sequencing ancient genomes now, actually European ancestry, Caucasian ethnicity, that is a more recently evolved ethnicity within the last 5,000 years. And as people hybridize and mix and so forth, you generate new ethnicities and so forth, and this is where we're headed. And I think my daughter is headed in that direction. And so, so who are we representing? And this gives you an appreciation of who we really are as a people. We're all really connected. And so looking at the different versions of me, this has been my perception growing up. Okay, mostly African, 10% each or so of European and Native American, and growing up it's not so much now, but even before when I was growing up, is that if you're one drop African, you're considered African American or African. This is what the oral history says. If you really dig down and talk to the elders in my family, you get 50% African, roughly 40 or something, 30 something, 2/3 really, European, and then Native American. And this is what the 23andMe results show, okay? And so, like I said, they don't have Native American ancestry in their database, so I'm trying to do something about that. So, as I said, we're trying to sequence the genomes of all vertebrate species. And we developed new technology with sequencing companies that helps us generate high-quality genome data that has fewer mistakes than the older technologies. And with that, NIH has put out an announcement to sequence the human genome over again with these new technologies. And we put in a grant application here from Rockefeller, and we got the award. All right, thank you. Along with four other institutions like Mount Sinai, UCSC, and others involved in this project. And we are doing the human genome over again. And this time we're including Native American and Taino and New Zealanders and so forth, people from around the world, 350 people representing human diversity, where you won't have this problem anymore, and we can tell 23andMe, please incorporate it into their database, and hopefully get a more accurate answer of who we really are. And we call this the Human Pan-Genome Project. Pan-genome meaning species-wide genomes that represents diversity. The original Human Genome Project was 5 people, chopped up into pieces and all mixed together, so you couldn't tell what is coming from who. Here we're keeping everybody's DNA separate, so we can see the diversity from one person to the next, to the next, to the next. And this is not only good for understanding our place amongst each other, but it's also good for health, personalized medicine, because some people respond to certain drugs or treatments differently from other people. And a lot of it's due to genetics, not only experience. So, so I'll end off here with the things that allow me to survive as an underrepresented minority scientist in a majority environment is that I have been trained to persevere in the face of daunting obstacles, and there have been obstacles I face, some that I've known, some that I haven't. Overcoming the feeling of less than, I always found is what they call imposter syndrome. Has anybody heard about this? All right, where you feel like you don't belong? I'm gonna raise my hand and say, when I first arrived here to Rockefeller, I felt like I didn't belong, all right? I felt like I was in a different country, even though I spoke English, all right? And it's because the cultural upbringing relative to everybody else around me felt different. And some people even felt I was here, I won't name names, but I do know that some people felt I was come here as a quota. I hope that is proven to be false. And so you start to internalize those feelings. And the only way I felt like to overcome those internal feelings was by publishing papers, by getting grants, by impacting society in a positive way. By the way, one of the reasons why I switched from dance to science is that I felt, like my mother always said, do something that has a positive impact on society. And I felt I can do that better as a dancer. Nope, the other way around. Better as a scientist than as a dancer. I mean, I'm going to go back to dance one day. All right? And so whenever I do something that has a good impact on society, I feel like I'm overcoming this feeling of less than. All right, my skin color, I feel, or your gender, is rarely neutral. It's either a disadvantage or an advantage. And that's unfortunately still the way it is today. And it's even more prevalent in our politics today than I've ever seen in my lifetime, which is not good news. So recognizing this, what I decided to focus on is not to try to, there have been a lot of people before me who tried to correct these problems, and we still need correction of them. But what we need more of now is to people to lead by example. We need people of diverse backgrounds, diverse genders, to be leaders in science and to be role models so that others can say, okay, there isn't something different about women, there isn't something different about a person of color. It's because look at this person X, Y, and Z, and look how successful they're doing. And this, I think, is going to overcome society's disease. In the meantime, I feel like I have two jobs. One is to be the best scientist I can be, and the other is to cure society's disease, like I'm talking to you now. I hope some of the words I had to say today is hopefully a cure for somebody's thinking, if not in this audience, but elsewhere, or you can echo what you heard here today to others. We need all scientists, not just ones of a particular color, to have these two jobs. We need everybody involved in trying to fix the ethnicity and gender divides here. Overcoming cultural shock and learning how to reach out. So like I said, the imposter syndrome, feeling like you don't belong. What that often does sometimes when you don't feel like you belong, it makes you sort of cower back. It makes you not raise your hand. It makes you not talk, and so forth. And whenever you get that feeling because you don't feel like you belong, just challenge yourself and run out and raise your hand to your teacher, ask the questions, do the work. If you don't understand something, speak up and say, I don't understand. It's okay, all right? There have been many things I don't understand. I actually failed my first prelim exam as a student here. Can you believe that? Well, she said no, but I did, okay? All right, and so I had to get back up on my feet and do it again. All right? And so don't let those feelings of less than or feeling like I don't belong to this culture make you cower away in the corner. And then finally here, the sixth lesson is my Martin Luther King and my Malcolm X lesson. Martin Luther King, accept all approaches, Malcolm X by any means necessary except for harming people. And take that approach to not only science and lots of things that you do to lead a path forward. Now you can't do everything, but there are some things that I can do that sometimes, in curing society's disease, scientists tend to be insular. We tend to talk to ourselves and not the outside world. And I really saw this one time when I was a director of a diversity program for students, travel fellowships for students to come to the Society for Neuroscience meetings, an international meeting that happens every year. And I was asked to direct the program. And eventually we opened up the term diversity to more than just ethnicity or gender, but also economic disadvantages or some other disadvantages. And one year we got an application from a woman in Utah who's white American, and she's applying to this diversity program that's supposed to have disadvantages, and you have to justify what your disadvantage is. Her disadvantage, she said, was that she had decided she wanted to go to college to become a neuroscientist, understand the brain, and maybe eventually cure some diseases about brain function. And, but her parents and her entire family disowned her for going to college, okay? Why? Because they felt she was going to be around the people who now believe in evolution, all right, the devil worshippers and the liberals, okay? And being around these people, they're bad people, all right? Scientists are bad people. And so therefore, no money to her. They forbade her sisters, her aunts and uncles, anybody to talk to her or help her, all right? And suddenly, she was found with a major disadvantage. And so she didn't make it that year, but we implied her, encouraged the next year, and she made it in. And so now, you know, where she's getting mentoring and so forth. And so, so this is lessons that I believe apply to everybody, and how can we change public perception is sometimes getting involved and becoming active, like here in the March for Science, the first one ever in history that I know of, back I think it was 2017 or so, when Trump became president, we had this march. The scientists went up in uproar, and you know, I was asked to talk on this rainy day, and I talked about some of these lessons that we've learned. And so I encourage you, those who want to become scientists, to communicate to the outside world also beyond science, because we need the outside world, outside of science, to also be educated about these things, that we don't worship the devil, all right? And I will stop there and take questions, and thank you for your attention. They're getting, okay, we got the rest of them up here for you. So we'll do the same thing, this side, that side. Yes, over here. And you can ask anything you want. I've been asked to talk about my personal life so many times. I won't say everything that's personal. Okay, good.
Even after showing all you could have done.
Say it again?
Even after having all your awards and all the success that you've had, do you still feel as if you're still getting like segregated or like pushed back because of your color, even if you showed all the good things you could do?
It's a good question, and the answer is an unfortunate yes, that sometimes I feel like, okay, did I get this, you know, first person, whatever, you know, this because they needed somebody to say, okay, we at least done this. But I'm more educated now. I kind of quickly overcome those feelings of imposter syndrome by sometimes I take out my CV and I see all the papers that we publish, all the awards, right? I go look at how well our papers are being cited, and seeing which papers are being cited, which ones aren't, so that tells me something. But by others in the literature. So the evidence, when it stares back at me in the face, it says, Eric, just wash it away. You're okay. Just keep doing what you're doing. And that's the lesson that I would say you should take as well. Okay, back here, and then you. Okay. Oh, give the microphone to her, and I'll answer this side, and then come back.
I just have a quick question about your experience with 23andMe. Were there any concerns you had while you were sharing yours and your daughter's DNA with the world and kind of sharing it with the company? Was there anything you were concerned about?
Yeah, so I actually don't have that much concerns because I had to learn, as being a dancer and also being trained in the performing arts, you learn to have to open up yourself to the public and so forth to express your art. But I can say my mother and some others were having concerns about, okay, if 23andMe or others get the DNA, will they be discriminated against for insurance, health insurance, and other things? Even actually trying to talk to some Native American chiefs in upstate New York about getting Native American samples. Some of them are afraid, and some of them forbid their people to actually even allow their DNA to be analyzed because they're afraid the government's going to develop viruses to finally kill them all off. All right? And so, and that's not me personally. I don't want to do that. I don't want to kill off a part of me or anybody else. And so I think that anything you do in science, there's always going to be the positives and there's always going to be the negatives. And I think in this case of understanding our own genomes for understanding our relationships with each other or health, that the benefits outweigh the disadvantages of having that information, whether it be from 23andMe and elsewhere. And we just need good regulations to manage that as opposed to not do it at all.
So mine's a two-part question. I want to know what type of science, what inspired you to go into your specific field of science, and what type of dance did you do?
Okay, all right. So I'll start with the second one. I started out as a ballet dancer. Well, actually even before that. I was imitating, anybody heard of Saturday Night Fever? Yeah. Okay, yes. So I started imitating John Travolta and Saturday Night Fever, you know, when I was a teenager. And I started going to disco clubs and so forth. They called them disco clubs then. And was winning dance contests. So I thought, oh, I'll become a disco dancer. But then I got into high school of performing arts. And like I was saying, where I remember I talked about playing a difficult instrument and an easy one. I thought if I learned to become a ballet dancer, then that'll help me learn how to dance any other kind of dance. And so I chose ballet. But then ballet, although I liked it a lot and I was doing somewhat decent in it and so forth, it didn't soothe my soul enough. So I got into jazz and eventually did African dance for a number of years. And so, so now, jumping a number of years later, I haven't stopped dancing. All right, to partly answer your question, I thought I was going to stop when I was going to try to graduate undergrad, or then do my graduate work here, or as professor, or when I had kids and so forth. I just kept dancing. And not necessarily professionally, but I kept dancing, and now I do salsa dancing. That's my in-between. Yes, thank you. And I perform in the little local clubs around here in New York City with a salsa dance team. And so what I find is that it has kept my mind and body healthy in terms of not only physically healthy, but mentally healthy, actually, to help me with my science. Now, the second part of your question was?
What inspired you to go into
what inspired me to do what?
your specific field of science?
Yeah, in my specific field of science. So it was, so when I decided I wanted to be a scientist, I had two passions two things that I was getting ambitious about. One was understanding the origins of the universe. The other was learning how the brain works. And this was at the transition from being an undergraduate to a graduate student. And I decided to choose the brain because it controls dance. It was a simple choice, right? Like that. It controls dance. It's here on the earth. It's something I can touch, right? I can hold in my hands, post-mortem, of course. Okay, and so that was the main reason. I was fascinated by both questions, and especially for origins of the universe, I was just fascinated by origins of things generally. Yes, this side? Okay.
I have the mic, okay. So like you, I am also very interested in both arts and sciences, and I hope to pursue a career in sciences after college. But I also feel that with that, not having the arts with me would be sort of unfulfilling. So I want to know, how do you incorporate dance into your research, if you do, and how do you find that balance?
Yeah, we're only recently starting to incorporate dance into my research. We actually have some grant proposals we're preparing and a conference I've been asked to be part of on the neurobiology of dance, how the brain controls dancing, and how it might be related to vocal learning. So I'm actually incorporating into my research. I never thought I'd do that. I just thought these are two separate parts of my lives and they don't quite come together, but they are. The other is, you asked about the, what was it? The balance, yes. This is what we might want to call work-life balance. And it goes for any kind of career. So you want to be careful about just doing one thing only in your entire life and tuning out the rest of the world. You may become good at it, but you may burn yourself out. You may become overstressed. So what I've discovered in creating a work-life balance is I put into my schedule, and I do have a very busy schedule, unfortunately, right? But I do put into my schedule specific times of the day or the evening that I'm going to go to dance class, or that I'm going to go to dance rehearsal, or do something else. I don't make that my dominant amount of time, but it is there in my schedule. So I am actually forced to do it, even if I don't want to do it, because I didn't schedule anything else at that time.
Hello. What do you think is your biggest or most interesting discovery till this day in the science field and about yourself?
Wow, okay. All right, she gets that question. That's a hard one for me. Because, you're also asking me what I discover about myself. Let me take the easy one first. Discover about something else. I would say the most interesting one that I discovered actually is right around the time I was transitioning between Rockefeller and Duke. We found that remember that gene activity I showed you in the brain that lights up when the birds sing, that white signal on the red background. Found accidentally, I started to see there was differences in the brain of some birds who were singing in different situations. The gene activation was there, in other cases it was not there, it's partially there, and it didn't correlate with the amount of singing that I showed you earlier. I was trying to figure, what the heck is going on here? And after doing a number of tests, what we discovered, it made a difference to whom the bird was singing to, okay? And the social context. So if the bird was singing its courtship song and to other birds and facing them, we had one gene activation pattern that was dramatically different than if the bird was singing in a way by himself, like rehearsing in the shower and practicing, okay? And we titled the paper, For Whom the Bird Sings, okay? Like, Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls, right? And so, this really then opened up a whole field of investigations. Lots of labs started trying to understand this phenomenon. And we couldn't hear the difference in the birds' vocalizations. We couldn't tell. Who asked that question earlier about, do we know what the animals are saying? Here, we could hardly hear any difference in the song, yet the brain activation patterns were so dramatically different. Finally, it was discovered there are small differences in the songs, in the different social contexts. The listening animals detect those small differences, they're meaningful to them, and the brain pattern activations are very different when you're actually practicing your song in the shower to actually talking to somebody. And so, so that was my favorite scientific discovery. What I've learned about myself, I would say the hardest thing was waking up 79% European, but even 50%, right? And being, you can look at me and, some people say, oh, you're not African American and so forth, especially when they hear me talk. But I, just growing up and seeing that the way I've been taught to view myself and the way I am really genetically is different. And the genetics helped me align those two more accurately, discovering that one part of my ancestry is not being discussed, all right? Partly because it's through, let's say, involuntary sex, okay? All right, from the plantations, from the slave plantations. Another part of my ancestry is being overamplified and so forth. And so realizing that and realizing how connected I am to a lot of other people in ways that I hadn't imagined is a big discovery for me. Yes. That was a long answer because it was a question that required a lot of explanation. Yes, over here? Yes, okay.
Oh, okay. So I noticed you have a Brazilian researcher in your lab.
Yes.
So did she or he publish anything in Portuguese?
Okay, so right now, not before I did, but not now, but yes. We actually did, we had to write permits to be able to do studies and get permission to do some studies on some animals. And I know a little bit of Spanish, like I said, my wife was Puerto Rican and so forth, but I had to also then learn to try to understand some words in Portuguese and communicate. Actually, they were mistaking me for being Brazilian more than my colleague who was with me, who is Brazilian, right?
You do look Brazilian.
Right, and I bet you if we took the genomes of Brazilians, you would find something similar to what I found in mine, right? And so, yes, they had to publish some science in Portuguese in order to actually get the project approved. And so I had to write some grant proposals in Portuguese. And so the little bit of words I knew, I would tell my colleague, okay, this doesn't make sense. And he was like, how could you figure that out? I says, well, this sounds like Spanish a little bit here and there. So yes, if you can use multiple languages, you'll be better off at getting grants funded. On this side here? Yes. Oh, way over here, okay.
Can you do a dance move for us?
There you go. That's okay. I can do that a little bit better, but not now. Okay. All right, great question. Thanks. Okay, over here.
Hi, I'm over here.
Okay. Oh, way over here.
Hi.
Okay, yes.
I'm wondering, you talked a little bit about your role models in your family, both being positive and negative. I'm wondering how your family felt about your decision to become a scientist versus a dancer, and I'm specifically interested because as the child of immigrants myself, when I said I wanted to be a scientist, the assumption was, oh, so you're going to be a doctor.
Right.
But I didn't want to be a doctor.
Right.
And so deciding or choosing a scientific career that was not kind of an applied scientific career was a challenge, and I didn't find much support. And I'm wondering what the support was in your family for making a similar decision.
So in my own family, yes, they were, including my mother, were bragging, oh, my son is going to be a doctor, you know, when I was an undergraduate student. And I wasn't deciding yet. I was thinking I'd like to be a doctor, but I discovered that I actually like the creative process of figuring out how things work or what's wrong with somebody for a certain disease or disorder, or how to fix it. And soon discover it's really the scientists who are figuring out those answers to those questions, not necessarily the physicians, although they do as well, but more the scientists that figure out the diseases and the cures. And so when I decided I wanted to be a scientist and not a doctor, there was some disappointment. You would think that should be really exciting, right? But I would have to say that there was more support than disappointment. At least it wasn't something else like, I don't know, I don't want to downgrade any other careers. But anyway, but I have to say that from a broader point of view, and my family included, I find that people from disadvantaged backgrounds, particularly where it's been generations like that, is that, that you becoming a doctor is not only breaking a cycle of economic poverty, but of psychological poverty. And so a lot of folks and persons of color or otherwise, families, they are proud of their son, their daughter, the doctor, not only so much because they're going to get paid more, but also because it's a intellectual status, that you belong to a different status, that you're breaking an intellectual cycle of poverty. And that is what I saw in my family. Yes?
Oh, sorry.
But I broke that cycle through science, by the way. Okay, yes.
I just wanted to know if, as a scientist, do you believe in God? Do you have a faith? And why or why not?
Yeah, it's a good question, yes. So I look at it in two dimensions, right? One is, as a scientist, and I believe whatever I see, there's evidence for, okay? And if there's evidence for it, and I'm convinced by that evidence, then I believe it. If there's evidence against it, then I don't believe it. And there are plenty of people, unfortunately, in this country, including in politics, including the current leader of our country, who sees evidence and doesn't believe it, all right? And so, and this is what I want to encourage you all to do. Practice an evidence-based approach to life. Now, with that said, in the second dimension of my question, is that there are many things that we don't know, all right? There are many things that go on in this universe. We have no idea. We once had no idea if there are other planets. Now we know there do. We have no idea if there is life on those other planets. But there are a lot of people who believe there is because of circumstance on this planet. There are a lot of people that believe there are things out there in the universe, or they believe it's there, but they have no evidence for it and no evidence against it. And this does include, I think, a higher level creator of some sort that could create something like we create pies, an apple pie and so forth. Whether that's really a God in the religious sense of the Christian, the Buddhist, I grew up as a Buddhist, by the way, and partly also a Baptist Christian. And personally myself, I don't believe in the kind of God that I read in the Bible or in some other religious textbooks, but I do believe it is possible that there are, let's say, beings or supernatural powers or one unifying power out there that's beyond our comprehension today of what we know, that we have evidence not for or against. So I hope that answers your question, or at least to a certain degree. Yes? Yes? Okay.
Besides the Big Bang Theory, do you have any other, do you know of any other theories to the origin of the universe?
Any other theories of the universe?
Yeah.
Okay, even though I wanted to study the origins of the universe, I hadn't really done that. And I just read some popular science magazines about it, and I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued by the idea, what's his name, who had Lou Gehrig's disease. Hawking, right. Yes, this idea that there is multiple universes as opposed to one universe. And there again, that was determined mathematically, not experimentally with microscopes, or telescopes, that is. I think of microscopes in the lab. All right. And so, that's the universal theory that intrigues me the most. And it goes to a bigger thing is there a beginning and an end? Okay? If you have a universe and another universe within it and another universe, outside of that and outside of that, where does it end? Or are things circular and so forth? And so the concept of beginning and ending is the one that puzzles me the most for the universe or anything else.
Theoretically, is there almost an omniverse that almost withholds everything inside it, like all the multi-universes?
Yeah, I don't, so that's what I don't, so if there's an omni-universe that holds all the other universes in it, don't know the answer to that, and I never studied it, and I don't know if somebody else has, but I can actually picture it, But this would be, once again, it's something that might be mathematically demonstrated, but not actually shown experimentally. But good questions. Yes?
As I prepare to go into the STEM field, I know there's many disadvantages to being a minority in a majority field, but could you expand upon the advantages there may be and if you've experienced any firsthand?
Say it again? Okay, sorry, give it the microphone again. Yeah.
As I prepare,
I was thinking about the omniverse. Okay. Yeah.
As I prepare to go into the STEM field, I know there's many disadvantages to being a minority in a majority field, but I wanted to know if you could expand on the advantages that there may be, and if you've experienced any firsthand.
Yeah. So the advantages are, there's so many, that if you have a Ph.D., particularly in the sciences, those are the most underemployed people. That is, it's easy to get a job on something. It doesn't necessarily mean being a faculty like myself. The other is that the demographics are changing. And I think in the future, persons like myself are going to feel less isolated, but still, it's still an issue. Another advantage is that if you're a person that likes to do artistic things, right, and you love what you do, this is a job that I love what I'm doing. I'm in love with my job, okay? It's very rare to have a job that you're in love with, that you really like doing. I wake up wanting to do science, kind of like somebody wakes up wanting to go out dancing at night, all right? And if you can do that and get paid for it, even with the things that I felt and experienced, some things I even told you I had experienced, that to me is an advantage. That's a good thing. Okay. With that said, let's go beyond your individualness or my individualness, and let's take the country. 2012 was the first year in the United States that there were more non-white people born than there were white, okay? Meaning that 18 years from the year of 2012, we're going to have a majority population, or the Caucasian population will be, for the first time in American history, be minority. Now, for all my Caucasian relatives, that's okay. We're all people. But what it also means is that what has happened, and I went to a congressional hearing about this is how I know about this, because they called some scientists in to predict what's going to happen for the future. Well, if you have white Americans who have disproportionately being educated in science and STEM fields, and the proportion of the United States in that population is going to be less. But what it would mean is that if we don't change the disadvantages and the advantage ratio here, we're going to have a population with fewer scientists, fewer engineers, unless we get people of more diverse background, born in 2012 and beyond or even earlier, into the sciences. So if you go into the sciences, you're going to be helping the country, all right, by the time we're at 2018. Okay, one here, and then I'll go to that side. Okay, yes?
Hi.
Hi.
Okay. So, what factors made you change from being a professor at Duke and go to Rockefeller instead? Like, besides
I do have an opinion. I'm just not sure how public I should say it, but I'll say it. I will say it because I even told them that Duke and Rockefeller University are both great places. And if you get into any one of them, I encourage you to go in one of them. If you get into both of them, I encourage you to come to Rockefeller. All right, so, what I found at Duke was that it was a great place for me to grow up as a scientist, to allow me to explore. They gave me lots of resources to do to pursue what I wanted to do, like Star Trek, go where no person has gone before, right? I'm being politically correct with the naming here, the gender. So, but what I found is that what's interesting is that there is some more conservative thinking there, that even in the sciences, it was hard to blossom out beyond a certain level. Whereas Rockefeller here, what I find is that it's one of the institutions, and not just compared to Duke, compared to places around the world, you have more freedom of creative thinking here than I've seen anywhere else. Maybe Stanford is close, or the two are neck and neck each year, Stanford University. And so when I come up with a crazy idea, I want to make a mouse learn how to talk, at some of the other universities, not just Duke, but other places, some of the faculty would say, oh, that's a crazy idea. We don't think you should be working on that. I says, but I want to test this hypothesis, Whereas I come here to Rockefeller and they say, all right, let's sit down and talk. Let's have a cup of coffee or tea or something, and let's discuss how to make this work. And so really here at Rockefeller, it's a more open-minded way of thinking about science. And that's what I really craved in order to try to do the kind of work that I wanted to do. On this side here, yes.
I have one more question. As a student going to your lab, I would like to know a little bit more about what's your interviewing process, what are you looking for in a person, because we're constantly trying to tell our students, your SAT scores and your report card is not everything. It doesn't matter as much as interview with people. So I want to kind of know a little bit about your interviewing process.
Yeah, good question. So for high school students who want to do research in a laboratory, now I'll mention this, they'll all come, and I can't fit everybody in the room here, or even the university, but there are several ways of getting involved. There's some summer programs that Jeannie knows about that you can apply to. It is competitive, but it doesn't mean you can't get in. My one lesson, the number 7 lesson that I didn't put there, is that if you don't try, it won't work, right? So you have to try to find out. And even trying over and over again, you've learned to how to hone your skills to put in good applications. So you can apply to these summer programs and come do research in our lab during the summer. And you can request to work with certain faculty, such as myself or others who are working in other areas of neuroscience, genomics, or some chemistry or physics. And another way is contacting the lab directly. You can go to the online directory, you can see the names of the individual PIs, and it's okay to send an email to the professor or to the assistant. Because, like I said, my time is busy, I actually have an assistant reading my emails, and we do have a process that, if I hadn't caught it, if I don't catch your email in time, she'll catch it, and she'll, in one of our meetings, she'll say, oh, Eric, this person from high school X or Y or Z has emailed, is interested in a summer program. And I will then say, okay, do we have openings for this year? And I will send out that person's resume, or if you have to send a resume, to members of the lab and say, are you interested? And if it looks like there's an interest and there's a match, we ask you to come in, we talk to you, and then we set up a volunteering mechanism for you to work in the lab. And so I have students 1 to 3 sometimes 4 students per year work in my lab from various high schools or undergraduate programs. Over here.
Everyone's been asking heavy-hitting questions, but I'm talking about hobbies here. I noticed you mentioned Lou Gehrig's disease, so I was wondering, do you have any time to follow hobbies like sports or maybe art?
To
or
follow
something?
what it's called?
Hobbies.
Hobbies?
Yeah, like some sort of thing you watch or do, like, do you play the Sunday newspaper or something?
I would consider my hobby is dance, but there are a few more other things I do besides dance. I don't want you to walk away that, you know, Dr. Jarvis only dances and goes to the lab. Okay. Right. I did learn to play a little piano, so I do that sometimes. I like to read books on history. I like to go for walks in Central Park. And I do like to taste different kinds of food. So, you know, I'm not a foodie expert, but you know, I've experienced enough to know what tastes good and doesn't. So, yes.
I was wondering, how did you manage being a researcher, professor, and a father at the same time? Was there ever a time you put your work before being a father or anything?
Yeah. Good question. I see you have a Duke shirt here. So yes, when I was at Duke, I was asked to give tough talk sessions to graduate students, and that included like if some of them became parents while they're in graduate school, because I became a parent when I was a student here at Rockefeller. And it wasn't easy, but it also wasn't impossible. I'm here. All right. And the way it worked it out was I discovered that my single friends or friends who are not parents, classmates, I'm like thinking, how do they waste so much time doing what they're doing? When you become a parent, in order to do well, my goodness, you figure out how much time you wasted as, you know, not doing things efficiently as not a parent. So you learn to become more efficient is one. The other that I discovered is that I got help. I got help from family members, from my siblings, from my mother and others who would help me tend to kids. The university also helped out. The university has a program where if you have children, they get daycare for much cheaper than everybody else. And so the public school across the street, I was living in the Bronx at the time. They made an exception to allow me to bring my kids there so I can bring them back and forth to the lab, usually while I'm working in the lab. And I found that my kids got plenty of love. They're decent kids. They're doing fine now. It was me as a father that I felt like I was missing out time with them by doing experiments in the lab. But when they tell me, you know, Daddy, we really appreciate how you brought us up and so forth, I feel that makes me feel good that, you know, I did something right. Now, with that said, I'm the father, but I'm not the childbearing parent. The mother also has even more challenges to overcome during pregnancy and so forth. And I'm going to say to all the men and all the women here is that, you know, especially if you have parents, like in this case, two of us were scientists, that are trying to push, you know, high-profile careers, help each other out. All right? Don't just leave everything to the mother or everything to the father. Get help and help each other out, and that's the way you're going to survive. Yes?
Hey, okay, so at the moment, what are you moving towards right now? And at what point would you be satisfied with what you've been doing?
What am I moving towards?
Well, yeah, what are you moving towards right now, like goals? And at what point would you be like satisfied with all the work you've done?
I'm starting, you know what? I'm never really satisfied. You know, I keep thinking as I get older, I'm going to stop and so forth and do something else. But there's so much that I wanted to do that haven't been accomplished yet. And when I look back on everything that is done, I'm surprised at how much has been accomplished, not only just in my own lab, but in the scientific community as well. And there's a saying out there that's now becoming more common because I think there's evidence for it. We as individuals or we as a collective community tend to overestimate what we can achieve in 2 years. So we make big goals and we don't achieve it in 2 years, but we underestimate what we can achieve in 10 years. I never thought we would have the ability to sequence the genomes of all these species and get the data that we've been doing now. So, so what I'm trying to achieve is that, yes, if I can get a mouse to imitate vocalization, it's fantastic. But will it stop there? Probably not. And if it doesn't happen, that's fine too. At least I put the idea out there and started moving things in that direction so that someone like yourself can follow up afterwards. So what I find what's more rewarding to me in my life now is not so much the actual scientific discoveries that we have made, but actually the people that we have trained. And those people then go on to train more people to make lives better for us and other people. And so it's really affecting people's lives and using science to affect people's lives. Yes, over here on the side? Good, yes.
Hello.
Where?
I was gonna, right here.
Oh, here, okay.
So I'm asking, did you go to achieve so many things, your accomplishments, to not become a statistic? To not become a statistic.
Yeah, this is good. I use statistics all the time. I have to. As scientists, we have to. And we have to trust statistics. But even in the world of statistics and in science broadly, the individual is starting to be appreciated more because there are outliers. And even with statistics, if you have a curve, has anybody heard about linear correlations? Right? Okay. So if something changes, something else changes, and so forth. Well, if you have a correlation, it means everything is not exactly equal. So where am I? No, I don't see myself as a statistic. I don't necessarily also see myself as an outlier, but I see myself as part of a wave that has a combination of individualism as well as population behavior. That's the best way I can answer that question. Yes? Yes? I get one in front of me? Okay. Well, okay.
Should we wait for just the mic?
Yeah. I haven't taken one from the front yet. Go ahead, yes.
So for someone that wants to go into a science field but does not know exactly what they want to study, what advice would you give that person?
Yeah, so what I discovered is that it's okay to mull over, to be undecided about what you want to do either in science or in your life, okay? But it's not okay to do it forever, okay? The practice that I've had is I mull over something for a few months or even a year, and if I have that time, and at the end of that time, I just say, okay, if I'm still undecided, if it's the brain or if it's the heart or if it's multi-universes, okay? I decide, okay, I make a decision. I'm going to do this now. I'm going to stick to it until I decide I don't like it anymore, and then I will switch. And even if I can't make a decision between A and B and C. If I don't have a high priority one, then I'll flip a coin. So do it as opposed to being undecided. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes, back here.
Did you have any preconceived notions about working in the science field? And if you did, what experiences sort of disproved or fortified these preconceived notions you had?
Yeah, I was one of the ones who had a preconceived notion that scientists could be boring. They lab coat people all the time, nerds, and not sociable. And then I became a scientist myself, and I discovered I don't think I'm boring. I don't think I'm non-sociable. I don't have a boring life. So that's one preconceived notion that I got rid of, and I hope you do as well. The other is that discovered that scientists aren't always right. So scientists get things wrong, and some of the best scientists are the ones who can admit that they got it wrong as fast as possible, so they can go in a new direction. So Fernando Nottebohm, I remember once hearing him say that he always would tell his son, Fernando Nottebohm, my former advisor from here, that understand 100% of what I say, but only believe in 50% of it. And that's the way science should be, because we're always discovering something new. We're always correcting mistakes from the past. Over here? Okay, I heard two more questions. Go ahead.
So basically, do you think in the future you will be working on any other projects other than the one that you're currently working on? Or do you think that this is going to be the project that you're just going to focus on for the rest of your life, I guess?
Yeah, so the two big projects I talked about today, engineering brain circuits for vocal behavior and sequencing all the genomes of all vertebrates or even all life. I mean, Yeah, I'm not sure those will be accomplished before my lifetime. So it is quite feasible that I pick things that I can be working on for the rest of my life without having completed them. And I'm okay with that. But what has surprised me is that in science, I told you I started out in bacterial genetics, and then I really honed on to neuroscience. And I thought I was going to be sticking with the brain the rest of my life. I didn't think I'd be getting involved in trying to do pan-human genomes to figure out how we're all related to each other and certain diseases that are specific to specific people. I had no idea I was going to go in that direction. And at least 1/3 of the effort of my research program is in that direction. So it's really, sometimes it's serendipitous. It's like, I don't know, something's going to spark an interest in me another 10 years from now that might make me change directions. And being in the field of science, particularly at a place like Rockefeller, where the discipline boundaries aren't so sharp, allows me to do that. So I don't have an answer as to what that next 10-year horizon is going to be like, but it's doable. If I want to switch, I can. All right, one more question. All right, unfortunately, the last question over here. All right.
As a scientist, do you believe, all right, so, because like you're a professional, and I have to ask this, because like personally, I believe this is just a whole bunch of baloney. Do you think astrology is a real science, like the ones with the zodiacs?
What is it?
Do you
astrology?
Hold on, everyone. Hold on.
I don't think he said I'm baloney. I think he said astrology is baloney. Okay,
yeah.
okay.
No. All right. So like, there's astronomy where you get to study the stars, the galaxies, black holes and stuff, theories and stuff. But like, astrology is an entire different thing. Like with the zodiacs and like people believing that giant space rocks can literally render what you're thinking about. So as a scientist, do you believe that astrology is a real science?
Yeah, so, and there are these things like ancient alien shows and so forth that a lot of, some of these things, no, I don't believe, right? Okay, but I want to clarify that, I mean, and I'm saying this because I do get into debates. I have a cousin who uses tarot cards and so forth to let me tell you what's going to happen to you in the future and how much I believe that. And I'm like thinking, how does she know this? What's the evidence, right? And I'll just have to say one anecdotal finding that makes me, I don't want to poo-poo everything, okay, about astrology or tarot card reading and so forth. But there is some interesting thing that I read. There is this book that, I forget the author, studied the personalities of something like 71,000 people living and in the past. And was able to make some predictions about a person's personality depending on where they were born and the time of the year they were born. And I even read what the prediction was for my own personality, and I said, oh, that does sound like me. How did this person predict that just based upon that information about the birth date and where you're born and even the time of the day? Were you born in the nighttime, the daytime, and so forth? How much of that is true, I don't know, because even though there were some quantitative statistics to it, I wasn't expert enough to really evaluate it that well, but I can see some truth into it that we humans are impacted by the climates that we are in. All species are impacted by the climate they're in. The Earth might be impacted by what part of the solar system or the universe it's in at any particular point in time. So there might be some truth about environment and when you were born, where you were born, influencing your personality. But in the moment-to-moment tarot card things, no, I didn't believe that. Sorry. But, all right, but I hope that was useful. Thank you for everything. Okay.